Hi guys, so let's now take a look at trade creation here. Okay, so trade creation is a situation where a country joins a free trade area, perhaps a customs union, and then benefits from the removal of trade restrictions. And in this case, we're really going to look at trade tariffs, okay? So here we go. The increased economic welfare that can occur when joining a free trade area, such as a customs union. Okay, now this can promote a number of benefits. Upon removing that protectionist restriction, a common external tariff in the case of a customs union, then it's likely to mean there's going to be reduced prices in this scenario. Moreover, lowest cost producers can be used, and that therefore helps to actually exploit a country's comparative advantage. Okay, it means that for the country that is joining that customs union, their businesses may be able to actually benefit from cheaper component inputs as well, so that it can actually compete more on price in terms of its price competitiveness. So let's look at the diagrammatics that we can see here. Now, in this diagram, we can see our areas split into our price for the EU plus the tariff. And then we've got the removal of the tariff which occurs on our green line there. So let's just start off by considering each of these areas, each of these respective areas. So if we label each one here, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Okay, so we've got each of those areas labelled. What we can see here in this scenario is the consumer surplus prior to actually removing that restriction is A and D. Okay. Meanwhile, the producer surplus for domestic producers is C and B. Now, domestic production would take place up to point Q1 here. Okay, so we can see domestic production would take place up to Q1, and we would see C and B as our area of producer surplus. E, well, that reflects an area of, a real area of loss of dynamic efficiency within that domestic economy. Because these businesses right here, really, if there was a free trade scenario in operation, they would not exist, and those resources could be shifted elsewhere in the economy, of course. So removing the tariff, of course, causes quite a dramatic impact here. Now, we could also see that for the customs union area, there is an area of tariff revenue, and that would be reflected by area F. And in this scenario, we can also see between Q1 and Q2, we have imports there. Okay, imports taking place from Q1 through to Q2. So let's now consider the removal of that tariff now upon joining the customs union. Let's put down Q3 here, and let's now put down Q4 here. Okay, so what we can now see is that the actual level of imports will actually increase. So there is going to be an increased level of import here as well. In addition to that, we can also see what has taken place with regard to consumer surplus. So if we just go through the consumer surplus quickly, we can see the point of consumption is now right out of Q4. So more goods are actually being consumed. These consumers from Q2 through to Q4, they can now afford to actually buy those products. That is an increase in consumer surplus represented by area G, which was previously a deadweight economic loss. So we can see, all in all, that things are looking very nice if you are a consumer in this sort of scenario. So we can see it's going to be A, B, D, E, F, and G. All of that is now consumer surplus. Meanwhile, if we consider the producer surplus for domestic producers now, well, we can see actually what is going to happen, because the imports have increased so significantly from Q4 to Q3. Well, the producer surplus has shrunk, okay? So the producer surplus has shrunk, but the actual domestic economy, and this is our domestic supply curve here, is more efficient now. And that area E is now a game in dynamic efficiency. We also see, of course, area G there is no longer a deadweight economic loss. So overall, we can see that there's an enormous impact upon economic welfare, as our definition suggests here on top of the board there. Okay, so let's run through some potential negatives though. So yes, there are going to be domestic job losses. From Q1 to Q3, those producers are no longer competing in the marketplace. There is the potential for job losses. That will likely be long-term structural unemployment. It will include some frictional unemployment in addition to that. For those that are longer-term unemployed, structurally unemployed, perhaps there's a generational decline in a particular area as a result of this. We know how nasty the impacts of globalization can be on particular communities. There could be a rise in inequality, and that can be very problematic. In addition to this, there's going to be redistributive issues for the government to deal with. How do they support those that are actually really suffering as a result of this sort of scenario? Okay, now let's finish this off in style then. So how can we evaluate this? Well, it does depend on the actual elasticities of demand and supply in this scenario. Because if the elasticities of supply are so much flatter and more elastic, then we can see the actual potential impact won't necessarily be Okay, so let's now finish this up in style. So here we go. The impact of trade creation depends upon the elasticities of demand and supply. Now, if supply is very, very elastic, of course, there's going to be a very, very big impact. Similarly, if demand is very inelastic, you can see the actual change that is caused by any price reduction is quite significant. So that's a big point. Now also, if the curve is more inelastic, of course, the actual change in the quantity demanded will not be as significant. So that's an excellent way of rounding this off, okay, to actually say how great the effect is likely to be. Great stuff, guys. We'll see you on the next lesson.